Hello? Welcome to our channel. I am your host. Today's mystery is The Woman in Cabin 13A Hercule Poirot Mystery. On a snowbound express cutting across the winter dark, a veiled woman in cabin 13 boards with a leather case and a terror she cannot conceal. Before dawn she is gone from a locked compartment. A banker lies dead among the linen trunks, and every passenger who spoke with the missing woman has reason to fear what she carried. Hercule Poirot, traveling only for rest, finds himself drawn into a mystery of stolen identity, buried wartime sin, false motherhood, and the terrible things people do to preserve the lives they have built upon a lie. Section 1. The Disturbance. The train left Paris beneath a sky the color of old pewter, and by the time it had carried its passengers clear of the outer lamps the weather had turned mean. Snow drifted slantwise across the windows. The black fields beyond seemed to rise and fall like a sea under moonless cloud. In such weather, one feels that ordinary obligations have been cut away with the city behind. A railway carriage becomes its own small kingdom, with its own laws, its own frictions, its own chances for mercy or ruin. Poirot had intended only to sleep. He had settled himself in the salon car with a tisane, his patent leather shoes shining absurdly against the storm, and declared to me, though I had not asked, that winter travel was an offense against symmetry. Yet even when he complained, there was pleasure at the edges of him. Poirot disliked discomfort in the same way a musician dislikes an instrument a shade out of tune, not because it defeated him, but because it gave him something to correct. We first noticed the young attendant because she nearly dropped a tray. She was slight, fair without fragility, and so intent on preserving the balance of a silver pot, 2 cups, and a little plate of lemon biscuits that she did not at once see the jerk in the carriage floor. The train struck a rough section of rail. The tray tilted. Poirot rose with a speed unexpected in such a meticulously arranged man, and steadied it with 2 fingers. "Merci, monsieur," she said, breathing out a laugh she had not meant to release. "That would have been the end of me for the evening. Monsieur Bissett counts the cups before he counts the staff." Her name, we learned a moment later, was Eleanor Bell. Her father had been English, her mother Belgian, and she possessed that particular railway gift of appearing brisk while carrying the fatigue of 10 people. There was a bruised shadow under one eye. Not illness, lack of sleep. Poirot noticed it as he notices all things. "You are worried for someone," he said. The smile that crossed her face then was not one of coquetry or politeness. It belonged to a person startled by being seen. "My brother," she said. "He has a chest complaint. The doctor in Dieppe says sea air would help him, so naturally we cannot afford the sea." She said it lightly, but the line remained between her brows after she moved away. At the time, none of us understood how much would come to rest on that young woman's courage before the journey ended. The veiled lady boarded at Meaux. I remember the station platform as a shining band of frost and gaslight. A porter wrestled open the carriage door. Wind blew in. The newcomer wore a dark traveling cloak lined in sable and a hat with a mourning veil drawn low enough to conceal everything but the pale angle of her chin. In one gloved hand she carried a leather dispatch case. With the other she gripped Eleanor's wrist before her foot had even crossed the step. "Cabin 13," she said. Her voice was low, cultured, and strained almost to breaking. "No one enters unless I ring. No one. Do you understand?" Eleanor, who had likely endured tyrants less refined and more obvious, inclined her head. "Of course, madam. Will you require supper?" "Tea." only tea. And if a gentleman asks for me, you will say I receive no visitors unless I send word first." She let go, but not fully. Her fingers remained a moment longer, as if the warmth of another human hand were the last stake she had left in the visible world. Poirot's gaze followed her down the corridor. "What do you make of that?" I asked. "Of the fear? It is genuine. Of the lady? Less so. She wishes very much to control what others believe of her. Those are not the same thing." Within the hour, the names in the passenger register began to gather around cabin 13 like filings around a magnet. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe was traveling to Vienna for the opening of a children's hospital wing. Her reputation had made 3 governments sentimental and 2 newspapers sanctimonious. She took the adjoining compartment, 11, with a maid who was already too intimidated to speak above a whisper. Colonel Adrian Blackwood occupied 10. He had the easy posture of a man long accustomed to command and the tired eyes of one who no longer trusted sleep. I had seen his photograph in illustrated papers, though never with the cane he now carried. Dr. Lucien Villette boarded at the last minute, waving apologies to the station master and tucking a medical bag beneath his arm. A surgeon of reputation, he said, summoned east for a consultation. His hands were those of a pianist or a card-sharp, fine, dry, almost beautiful until one imagined what they had done. In 12, Reverend Matthew Kells folded himself into clerical modesty and a thick wool scarf. His luggage consisted of one shabby valise and a locked-in dispatch box of parish records, or so he told anyone unfortunate enough to ask. Celia Dane, listed without title, without companion, and without explanation, occupied a smaller compartment farther back. She was dark-haired, sharply dressed in clothes too theatrical for prudence, and too worn at the cuffs for wealth. When she laughed at something a porter said, several heads turned. Not because the laugh was loud, but because it contained defiance. Last among the notable travelers came Basil Renshaw. He entered the salon with the polished reluctance of a man who never admitted to curiosity, and could not survive without it. Thick silver hair, gold watch chain, mouth like a folded legal document. He spoke to Lady Beatrice with the ease of long acquaintance. He bowed to Blackwood. He appeared not to know the veiled woman in 13. This, as it happened, was the first lie of the night. At 10:30 Eleanor brought the tea tray to cabin 13. When she returned, there was a faint stain of violet on her sleeve. "Perfume," she said when Poirot asked. "Strong enough to leave a mark in the air." She hesitated. "And Madame had been crying, I think." Her gloves were damp. At 11 a note arrived for the veiled woman. Eleanor carried it. She should have left it at the door, by order. Instead she knocked, because she had heard movement inside and believed herself safe. Later she told us that the door opened only an inch. A pale hand took the envelope. As the gap narrowed again, she heard a second sound from within the compartment. Not a voice, exactly, but the suppressed intake of a person hiding tears or rage. Just after midnight the train entered the long cut beyond Chalons. Snow struck the windows like thrown salt. The corridor lamps dimmed with the labor of the engine. Poirot had retired. I had nearly done the same when a sound reached us through the carriage wall. Not a scream. That would be too theatrical, too clean. It was the sort of sound one makes when terror rises before the breath can dress it in language. Then came the shattering of china. Doors opened up and down the corridor. Eleanor ran first. Lady Beatrice's maid cried out from behind her mistress. Blackwood came fast despite the cane. Villette from the far end, already stripping off his gloves. Renshaw remained near the salon threshold, one hand inside his coat, his expression not alarmed but calculating. Cabin 13 was locked. Eleanor knocked. No answer. She called. Nothing. Poirot arrived behind us wearing his dressing gown beneath his overcoat, and looking, in that moment, more awake than any of us. The key. Her hands shook as she tried it. The key turned, but the door moved scarcely an inch before catching on the security chain inside. Villette bent, peered through the gap, and swore under his breath. "I can see no one," he said. Blackwood braced his shoulder against the door. The chain snapped on the second blow. The compartment stood empty. The window was closed. The glass filmed with frost. The lamp burned low over a scene of disorder so intimate that it struck like an intrusion. The tea service overturned, one cup shattered, the other upright beside the dispatch case, a chair tipped sideways, a glove on the floor, and on the berth, a dark oval where a woman's veil had been crushed into the blanket as if by a desperate hand. But there was no woman. Only a single pearl earring glittering near the washstand drain. Poirot crossed the threshold and stopped. "Do not touch anything," he said. His voice had changed. The storm seemed, for an instant, to retreat from the windows. He stooped over the berth, then looked up at the pillow, the floor, the little silver pot, and finally the intact teacup whose rim showed a lip mark no man there could fail to notice. "Interesting," he murmured. "What is interesting?" I asked. He did not answer. He lifted the dispatch case. It was locked. Then Eleanor, who had gone as white as paper, pointed toward the narrow passage leading to the service compartments. On the brass latch of the linen locker, half hidden where the light did not easily fall, hung a thread of black morning silk. And from behind that door came a sound like something heavy settling after being moved. Section 2. The Questions. Blackwood reached the locker first, but Poirot's hand closed around the colonel's sleeve. "Not yet. We shall observe before we disturb." It was infuriating advice, which is one reason human beings so often ignore it. Blackwood did not. Whether from discipline or from the fact that Poirot's certainty disarmed him, I could not tell. Villette crouched to listen at the panel. Eleanor stood clutching her ring of service keys so tightly that the marks would later remain in her palm. The sound did not come again. Poirot examined the black thread on the latch without touching it, then glanced back toward cabin 13. The corridor was close with perfume and the sharper smell of broken tea. Lady Beatrice had one hand at her throat. Celia Dane had appeared from the rear compartments with a shawl drawn over her nightdress, her expression alert rather than startled, as if crises were native air to her. "Mademoiselle Belle," said Poirot, "open the locker now, if you please." Slowly. The key turned with a metallic complaint. Inside were folded blankets, stacked sheets, and 2 wicker laundry hampers. Nothing more. No woman. No intruder. No breathing witness to explain the chain upon the door or the disturbance within. Yet one blanket had slipped to the floor, and beneath it lay a man's gold watch, cracked across the face. Basil Renshaw came forward at once. "Mine," he said. Poirot looked at him. "You are certain?" "Of course I am certain. It was in my pocket earlier." He reached for it, then checked himself under Poirot's gaze. I suppose now you will wish to tell me where it has been. The watch had stopped at 14 minutes past 1. Curious, said Poirot. The hour is not yet 1. A faint flush inclined Rancho's neck. Then it must have stopped earlier. Watches do that. Not usually in linen lockers. That received no answer. The train manager, Monsieur Bissett, arrived full of outrage, collar half buttoned and dignity in tatters. He objected to scandal, delay, official inquiry, the breaking of railway property, and above all to the possibility of newspapers. Poirot silenced him by requesting, in tones of great politeness, that no station be alerted until the next major stop unless blood or a body presented itself. Bissett, after a brief inward struggle between self-importance and relief, agreed. So the first hour of the investigation passed not in discovery but in interviews. Poirot began with Eleanor in the deserted salon, where the storm rubbed its white face against the windows. She answered directly, though fear thinned her voice. The veiled woman had booked under the name Mrs. Vera Lascelles. The reservation had been made through a private agent in Paris. No maid. No companion. One dispatch case, one small traveling bag, no trunk. She had insisted on privacy, accepted only tea, and received one note. From whom? Poirot asked. There was no signature on the outside. It had been left with the platform porter at Meaux. And inside the compartment, when you brought the tea? Eleanor shut her eyes to recall it. The lamp was low. Madame kept the veil on. She had removed one glove. Her hand looked older than her voice, if that makes sense. There was a scent of violets. I set the tray down. She asked whether Lady Beatrice Ashcombe had yet retired. I said I believed so. Then she asked who occupied cabin 10. When I told her, she pressed her fingers so hard to the cup I thought it might break. Colonel Blackwood troubled her? Yes. Or frightened her. Or reminded her of something. Eleanor swallowed. There was also another cup. Another cup? On the washstand. Empty. I thought perhaps it had been left by the porter from before boarding, but now I am not sure. Poirot's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. That small detail would later prove far more important than it seemed. Lady Beatrice received us next. Even in a dressing gown she carried herself like a portrait with opinions about the frame. She admitted at once that she had expected to meet someone aboard the train, though not, she said, the woman in 13. Mr. Renshaw requested a private word regarding a trust matter, she said. I refused him until morning. As for the missing passenger, I know nothing. You were heard in the corridor shortly before midnight, Poirot said. Her gaze did not flicker. I suffer migraines. I walked for air. Did you pass cabin 13? I passed many doors, Monsieur Poirot. If a woman chooses to lock herself inside one, must I take inventory? Yet her maid, when questioned separately, admitted that Lady Beatrice had indeed gone out, and returned without the brooch she had worn at supper. It was a pearl brooch shaped like a laurel spray. She believed it had been left in the salon. Pearls. Another small resonance. Colonel Blackwood proved more difficult. He answered plainly on military matters, evasively on personal ones, and with a particular irritation when asked whether he knew Evelyn Harrow. Should I? Perhaps once. During the war. Field hospitals near Amiens. The colonel's jaw hardened. I knew 100 nurses and buried half the men they served. I cannot be expected to catalogue the rest. He glanced toward cabin 13. If the woman in there wished to stage a melodrama, she has chosen an effective method. You do not think she is in danger? Blackwood hesitated too long. I think, he said finally, that someone on this train has reason to want us frightened. Dr. Villette, by contrast, looked frightened already. He denied knowing the missing passenger, then contradicted himself by asking whether the leather dispatch case had been opened. Why should that matter? Poirot said. Villette moistened his lips. Because if this concerns old hospital records, they may be confidential. You are admirably quick, Doctor, to imagine hospital records where none have yet been mentioned. Villette said nothing further. Reverend Kells was mild, courteous, and so visibly uncomfortable that for a moment I almost pitied him. He confessed to having recognized Lady Beatrice and Colonel Blackwood from charitable committees in London some years before. He denied any acquaintance with Renshaw or the veiled woman. Yet his hands, resting on the head of his cane, trembled when Poirot spoke the name Evelyn Harrow. Was she dead? The Reverend asked before he could stop himself. Poirot did not answer the question. He merely inclined his head and moved on. Celia Dane met him with that dangerous composure which often marks either innocence or a great deal of practice. She smoked one cigarette during the interview and crushed a second to pieces unlit between her fingers. I heard the noise, she said. I opened my door. I saw Lady Beatrice near the end of the corridor, and Mr. Renshaw by the salon. I saw no veiled woman. Do you know Evelyn Harrow? A flash crossed her face. Not surprise. Recognition chained to caution. No. Should I? That depends on who you are. For the first time she smiled, though not with amusement. On trains, Monsieur Poirot, that is true of everybody. When the interviews ended, Poirot returned alone to cabin 13 and let me wait by the corridor door. He remained there long enough for the train to slow under fresh drifts. When he emerged, he held in his palm a gray smear on a folded handkerchief. Soot, he said. From the corridor stove? There is no corridor stove. Electric heat only. Yet the hem of the cloak by the berth bears soot, and in the ashtray someone has burned paper in a great hurry. Look! From his pocket he produced a charred scrap. The printing was gone. Only one line remained legible along the edge, baptized this 12th day of June. A certificate? I said. Perhaps. Perhaps only part of one. He looked again toward the compartment. Then, in a motion so quick I nearly missed it, he bent and lifted the unbroken teacup from the tray. There were two distinct traces upon the china, one vivid stain shaped by a full lower lip, the other barely there, a pale crescent set at a different angle. Two women, I said. Poirot turned the cup in the light. Or one woman twice? No. The mouths disagree too much. And yet Mademoiselle Belle brought tea for one passenger only. Already, mon ami, our vanished lady is less singular than she appears. Before I could answer, the train lurched with violence enough to throw us both against the passage wall. From the service end of the carriage came a cry, this one unmistakably masculine, choked off midway by impact. We ran. The second linen hamper had overturned. Sheets spilled across the floor like surrendered flags. And wedged behind them, half hidden by the narrow compartment door he had perhaps hoped to close before collapsing, lay Basil Renshaw with a letter opener in his throat. His dead eyes were fixed not on us, but toward cabin 13. Section 3. The first contradiction. There is a difference between panic and fear. Panic scatters. Fear arranges itself. After the discovery of Basil Renshaw's body, the whole carriage changed character. Doors that had opened from curiosity shut from self-protection. Conversations lowered into murmur or stopped entirely when footsteps approached. Even the train seemed to sense what it carried. Its motion became oddly deliberate, as though each wheel measured the dark with care. Villette knelt by the banker and pronounced what no one could fail to see. "Dead within minutes," he said. "Possibly less." The blade entered upward. Considerable force. He might have staggered here before falling. He looked at Poirot. "Or been placed." "Yes," said Poirot. "Placed is often a very useful word." The letter opener belonged to the writing desk in the salon. Monsieur Bissett confirmed it with deep misery. Eleanor, now fighting tears, swore she had polished it herself after supper. Blackwood demanded the train be stopped at once, and the police informed. Lady Beatrice agreed, though one felt she agreed to everything that increased distance between herself and the dead man. Poirot overruled them, gently but completely. "The snow has already delayed us. We are 3 hours from a station equipped to receive so grave a matter. If the murderer remains among us, as I think almost certain, then every minute before the arrival of the police is a minute in which observation can do what handcuffs cannot. No one leaves the carriage. No luggage is moved. No garment is altered or destroyed. Monsieur Bissett, you will tell the staff this is a matter of railway discipline if they prefer that phrase to homicide." Under the force of his certainty, objections shrank. It is one of Poirot's most unsettling gifts. He does not so much command as make resistance feel untidy. Renshaw's body yielded its first contradiction at once. The watch in the linen locker, now returned to his waistcoat, had stopped at 1:14. Yet Eleanor insisted she had seen him alive in the corridor at nearly 1:30, standing outside the salon as if deciding whether to knock upon Lady Beatrice's door. "I remember because I had just checked the service clock," she said. "It was 27 minutes past 1. "Then either you are mistaken," said Blackwood, too quickly, "or the watch stopped earlier in the evening and means nothing." "It means something to the person who struck it," said Poirot. More interesting still was Renshaw's right cuff. Inside the lining, snagged where no gentleman would hide jewelry intentionally, clung the little spring clasp of a pearl earring. The pearl itself was missing. Lady Beatrice touched her left ear reflexively when Poirot displayed it. She wore no pearls now. "My maid packed several pairs," she said. "Surely half Europe owns pearls, Monsieur Poirot." Indeed. Fortunately not half Europe was wrestling with Mr. Renshaw before he died. She did not answer. But her maid looked away too fast. Poirot returned to cabin 13 before dawn fully broke and undertook a second, more minute examination. I watched him from the doorway while snow light slowly diluted the lamplight. He measured the berth by eye, straightened the crushed veil, examined the washstand drain, then drew out from behind the folded towels a cloth marked with streaks of brownish cream. "Grease paint," he said. "Not the toilette of an anxious widow. The toilette of someone becoming someone else." He next inspected the cloak left hanging inside the wardrobe. Its hem bore black soot and a faint smear of brick dust. Not carriage dust. Station dust, perhaps, or the residue of an older building with coal grates and neglected hearths. The woman who wore this came from somewhere warmer, dirtier, and more desperate than this train, he murmured. In the ashtray lay further fragments of the burnt paper. Together with the scrap found earlier, they now yielded more: the word Saint Marguerite, part of a parish seal, and the letters CLA, followed by scorched absence. Reverend Kells, when shown the fragments, turned the color of suet. Saint Marguerite was an orphan mission near Amiens, he admitted. Bombed badly in the final year of the war. Records were lost. Many children were displaced. I helped with relief collections. Nothing more. Nothing more is frequently too little, said Poirot. Celia Dane, summoned again, was asked to remove her gloves. She did so with a flare of resentment that was almost theatrical enough to be useful. Her fingers were stained at the base of the thumb with makeup not entirely washed away. She saw that Poirot saw. I am an actress, she said. That is neither a crime nor a revelation. No, but it is a profession skilled in transformation. Poirot placed the grease paint cloth on the table between them. Did you visit cabin 13? Her eyes rested on the cloth. No. Did you know Evelyn Harrow? No. Did you ever live under another name? This time the pause arrived before the answer. Everyone on the stage does. It was not confession, but it was close enough to stir the air in the room. Poirot let her go. At breakfast, no one ate much. The storm had trapped us in a white world without horizon. Telegraph lines dipped and vanished under drifts. From time to time the train slowed almost to stillness, shuddered, and dragged itself forward again. There was nowhere for a murderer to flee. That knowledge did not comfort. It sharpened appetite into threat. Eleanor brought coffee with admirable steadiness until Blackwood, meaning perhaps to help and certainly failing, asked whether all service keys had been accounted for. She froze. One key was missing. It was the duplicate key to the linen compartment where Renshaw had been found. Bissett's outrage became nearly operatic. Staff searched drawers, hooks, apron pockets, and service lockers. At last the missing key turned up beneath the radiator in Eleanor's own tiny service alcove, wrapped in a handkerchief she denied owning. The effect was immediate and ugly. This is intolerable, Bissett barked. You alone had access. No, Eleanor said, voice cracking but firm. All senior staff pass that alcove. So do passengers if the corridor is crowded. Someone put it there. Convenient. Quite, said Poirot, before she could defend herself further. Which is why I dislike it. Evidence too eager is like a witness too polished, it usually rehearses. Even so, suspicion had found the easiest path. Eleanor's brother was ill. Money was needed. Renshaw was known to lend privately at extravagant rates. Had she stolen, been discovered, lashed out in fear? Had the mysterious woman in cabin 13 bribed or threatened her? By noon the girl who had steadied the carriage all night moved through it like an exile among her own trays. Poirot, who seemed almost annoyed by such simplicity, asked instead to see the passenger register again. He traced the entries with one finger. Mrs. Vera Lascelles, Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, Colonel Adrian Blackwood, Dr. Lucien Villette, Reverend Matthew Kells, Miss Celia Dane, Mr. Basil Renshaw. Names arranged in a line, innocent to anyone not listening for their echoes. Tell me, he said to me, what sort of woman books under an alias, boards in fear, carries legal or parish documents, and sends inquiries not about police, husband, or lover, but about Lady Beatrice and Colonel Blackwood. One who means to accuse them. Or blackmail them. Exactly. And Mr. Renshaw? He is neither surprised nor uninvolved. He is the man who profits by secrets and underestimates how expensive they become. At 2 in the afternoon, Poirot requested a full search of the carriage. In the pocket of the cloak from cabin 13 he found nothing. In the dispatch case, once Villette had opened the lock with a surgeon's admirable lack of reverence, there were no letters at all, only folded newspaper cuttings about St. Marguerite Mission, a list of dates, and a small, framed photograph of a nurse standing beside 2 cots. On the back, in a faded hand, were written the words, "Not both mothers by morning." Blackwood, seeing the photograph, stepped back as if struck. That alone might have been dismissed as memory. It was what followed that changed the direction of the case. For when Poirot held the photograph beneath Reverend Kells's eyes, the clergyman whispered, without seeming to know he spoke aloud. "Then she kept it after all." "She?" said Poirot softly. Kells shut his mouth, but too late. We knew then that the missing woman in cabin 13 was no stranger to at least one person on that train. We did not yet know that she had probably been dead before the journey began. Section 4. The Convenient Suspect. Poirot announced the possibility of an earlier death in the mild tone another man might use to remark upon weather. The effect on the carriage was immediate and disproportionate, which is one sign that a thought has struck near truth. Kells dropped his spoon. Villette spilled coffee over his cuff and seemed not to feel it. Blackwood stared so fixedly at the passing whiteness beyond the glass that for an instant I thought he might prefer to leap into it rather than face the questions turning toward him. Only Lady Beatrice retained the appearance of composure, and even she seemed to become more polished rather than more calm, as if fear had reminded her what society expected and she meant to satisfy it to the last detail. "You suggest," she said, "that the woman who boarded in Meaux was not the woman whose papers these are?" "I suggest nothing yet. I compare. The fragments of a certificate, the photograph from St. Marguerite, the soot upon the cloak, the greed of Monsieur Renshaw, and the most instructive alarm shown by certain passengers. They do not sit together by accident." Bissett, desperate for an ordinary villain, returned to Eleanor. "It is the oldest hunger in any closed society. Find the weakest person and ask whether the story may be arranged around them." The missing key had been discovered in her alcove. The linen passage fell within her duties. She had admitted financial strain. Worst of all, she was not important enough to frighten anyone by being accused. At 4 o'clock Bissett demanded in front of witnesses that she empty her apron pockets. Out came a pencil stub, folded service orders, 1 hair ribbon, 2 sugar tablets, and a crumpled envelope addressed to Samuel Bell, Rue de Golans, Dieppe. Inside was a bill from a sanatorium and a penciled promise, 1 more month, Sam. I will manage it. Bissett lifted the paper as though poverty itself were evidence. You required money. Mr. Renshaw was found dead. Eleanor's face changed. Not in the manner of the guilty, but of the humiliated, those who have defended their circumstances for years and suddenly see those circumstances turned into accusation. Half the world requires money, she said. It is not the same as murder. Poirot stepped between them with a gentleness that carried more authority than Bissett's bluster. Exactly. Need is a condition, not a verdict. And if Mademoiselle were the murderer, why plant the key in her own alcove where the first search must discover it? One does not hide a jewel in a glass bowl and call it cunning. Bissett subsided, though without grace. The train stopped outside a buried signal for nearly half an hour. During that pause, Poirot asked permission to inspect every compartment, every valise, every traveling rug, and every waste bin. Blackwood objected. Lady Beatrice called it outrageous. Celia shrugged and said she had slept in theaters with 6 chorus girls and a goat, and had no remaining reverence for privacy. Villette granted access at once. Kells did so only after a visible struggle of conscience. Nothing in Blackwood's compartment appeared incriminating except an old letter in a woman's hand which he snatched away before I could read more than the words "you promised." His trunk contained military dispatches, a silver flask, and a pair of infant shoes so worn at the ribbons that they could only have been handled often. He saw me see them and shut the lid at once. Lady Beatrice's possessions were luxurious to the point of severity. She packed excellent linen, French scent, a jewel case, correspondence from hospital committees, and a framed photograph of a baby in christening lace. Her maids swore the picture never left her dressing table at home and travelled with milady everywhere. Yet the child in the frame was perhaps 6 months old, while the woman had lived with that image for 20 years. Such devotion may be grief. It may also be rehearsal. Villette's case contained instruments, laudanum, morphine, and a small vial of chloral hydrate. 1 ampoule was missing. For sleeping patients, he said? Or hysterical ones? Did you administer it last night? Poirot asked. The doctor met his eye, then looked away. No. That denial would have been more convincing if spoken before the question had time to wound him. Kells's dispatch box proved most interesting. Between parish ledgers and charitable appeals lay a packet of loose pages torn from an older register. The edges matched the burnt certificate fragments from cabin 13 as neatly as torn skin matches the hand. The surviving entries listed wartime baptisms at St. Marguerite Mission. Several names had been inked over. 1 line had been cut away entirely. Why remove it? Poirot asked. Kells sank onto the seat with both hands over his face. Because it should never have been written. Because I told myself mercy and cowardice were neighbors only for a night, and then the years made liars of us all. He said no more then, but enough had surfaced to blacken his name in every mind. Even so, the most dramatic discovery belonged to Celia Dane. Hidden beneath the false bottom of her hatbox, folded inside stage programs and old reviews, were 2 letters from a woman signed E. Harrow. The first read, "If you wish to know whose blood is yours, come to me alone." The second, "Do not trust Blackwood. Do not trust the lady. If I fail to meet you before departure, take my place. Let them come to you. One will betray himself." Bissett made a choking sound of triumph. Blackwood swore. Lady Beatrice's knuckles whitened on the arm of her chair. Celia, for the first time since the inquiry began, looked less defiant than cornered. "Now perhaps," said Poirot, "you will tell us why an unknown nurse instructs you to impersonate a woman in cabin 13. For several seconds she said nothing. When she finally spoke, the words seemed drawn through wire. "Because she told me she knew who my mother was." The silence that followed was so abrupt I heard snow ticking against the window sill. Celia laughed once without mirth. "There. It sounds melodramatic when said aloud, doesn't it? The actress discovers she is not who she believed. Very suitable for posters." Her voice roughened. "I was left at St. Marguerite after the war. I had a tag, no parents, no history worth keeping. I made my own. 3 weeks ago I received a letter from Evelyn Harrow. She said she had once nursed me. She said there had been a lie. She asked me to meet her in Paris. And did you? Yes. At a boarding house near the Gare de l'Est. She never arrived. Instead, a porter brought me a note saying she was watched, that I must take her cloak, her reservation, her name if needed, and board the train. I thought it mad. Then I saw the second note. Those names. She turned toward Blackwood and Lady Beatrice with naked hatred. I wanted answers. So the first great shift came into view. The woman in cabin 13, at least the one who boarded the train, was not Evelyn Harrow at all. It was Celia Dane under a veil, carrying another woman's fear and another woman's papers into a carriage full of people with reason to dread recognition. Blackwood seized upon it at once. Then the thing is obvious. She lured Renshaw out, quarreled with him, killed him when he discovered the deceit. No, said Eleanor before anyone else could speak. The room turned toward her. She flushed but went on. I served Mr. Renshaw brandy at 1:20. Miss Dane was in the rear lavatory then. I know because she asked for hot water to remove makeup from her hands. Celia stared at her. Why did you not say so before? Because no one asked me whether you washed your hands, Eleanor replied, and something like fragile alliance passed between them. Poirot's expression brightened a degree. A new witness. A broken convenience. Yet convenience is persistent. If Celia had impersonated Evelyn Harrow, then she had lied from the first. If she had received instructions from the missing nurse, then she had motive to conceal identity. And in Villette's medical case, discovered during the continued search, Bissett found a handkerchief stained with what proved to be Renshaw's blood. The doctor stared at it as if it had been planted by the devil. Explain this, said Blackwood. Villette's face collapsed inward. I cannot. Then I can, said Bissett eagerly. You met Renshaw, there was an argument, perhaps over these records or a patient. Stop, said Poirot. But Bissett, once launched, would not. Villette had motive if hospital secrets were involved. He had access to drugs. He had lied about the missing ampoule. He had blood on his handkerchief. Compared with vanished women and orphanage ledgers, he was satisfyingly direct. What none of them saw, what Poirot saw at once, was that the doctor's terror carried a quality quite unlike a murderer's fear. It was not fear of discovery. It was fear of being forced to tell a truth he had postponed for 20 years. The evening meal passed under watch. Celia remained effectively confined to the salon, where Poirot kept everyone visible. Eleanor moved in and out with plates no one wanted. Blackwood drank more than prudence advised. Kells prayed without appearing calmer. Lady Beatrice wrote several letters and tore up every one. Villette sat with his fingers pressed to his eyelids as though light itself had grown unbearable. Near 10 o'clock, the danger changed shape. Eleanor had gone to fetch fresh linen when we heard a crash from the service end. We found her on the floor beside the narrow steps leading to the baggage compartment, one hand bleeding, a heavy trunk inches from her skull. The retaining strap above had been cut. Had she arrived a second sooner, the trunk would have killed her. Inside its lid, snagged on a splinter where it had struck the wall, hung another thread of black mourning silk. Someone was not merely framing the most convenient suspect now. Someone meant to silence her before she remembered what she had seen. Section 5, The Hidden Clue. Eleanor insisted on standing as soon as Villette bound her hand. "If I sit down, they'll all look at me as if I am breakable," she muttered, and I confess the phrase moved me more than any grand declaration could have done. She was trembling with delayed shock, yet her first defense was dignity. Poirot, who had heard, touched her uninjured sleeve with extraordinary kindness. "Then you shall stand, mademoiselle. But only next to me, where I may object if the world becomes insolent." The cut-retaining strap was fresh. The trunk had been loosened not hours before but minutes. Whoever tampered with it knew Eleanor's rounds or watched for her. That narrowed the opportunity but not, unfortunately, the field. In a crowded carriage every movement is both witnessed and missed. Eyes glance, minds drift. People remember what mattered to them and overlook what mattered to someone dying nearby. Poirot returned to that problem like a jeweler turning flawed light. "Tell me again," he said to Eleanor, "exactly what occurred after you took hot water to Mademoiselle Dane." She closed her eyes. "I left the basin with her. On my way forward I nearly collided with Lady Beatrice outside cabin 11. She asked whether the train was on time. I said no. Then I saw Mr. Renshaw near the salon. He looked angry. I passed on. 2 minutes later I heard someone open the door of cabin 13. I assumed it was the lady in disguise returning. I did not look, because Monsieur Bissett had already warned me about gossip." "But you heard something?" A change in the voice. She frowned. "Not words. More, the scrape of breath, perhaps. Lower than before." Poirot's head lifted. "Lower?" "Only slightly. Enough that I thought Madame had been crying. Or perhaps had caught cold." This, too, joined the growing heap of contradictions: the hand that seemed older than the voice, the grease paint, the second cup, the lower tone heard later. Celia had certainly played the veiled woman for part of the night. But someone else, someone who wished to be taken for the same passenger, had entered or re-entered cabin 13 after Celia had gone to wash away paint. The woman in cabin 13 had become, in effect, 2 women. Poirot opened the dispatch case once more and studied the list of dates found inside. They corresponded to births, baptisms, hospital admissions, and one death registered under shellfire conditions near Amiens. Beside one entry, written in pencil and later rubbed at unsuccessfully, was a room number 13. "Hotel du Cygne," murmured Kells when shown the notation. He had given up pretending ignorance, and now resembled a man awaiting whether he had predicted years before. A boarding-house near the Gare. Evelyn Harrow stayed there whenever she came to Paris. Coal fires? Yes. Pearly swept chimneys. So the soot on the cloak had not come from the train at all. It came from the place where Evelyn Harrow should have met Celia and did not. Poirot asked Bissett for the train's telegraph schedule and sent a coded inquiry ahead to Paris through railway channels. Snow delayed replies, but before midnight one came back. A chambermaid at the Hotel du Cygne had discovered a female lodger dead in her room shortly after the express departed. The manager, fearing scandal and assuming apoplexy, had not yet involved the police because the storm had cut the local line and because human cowardice is often bureaucratic before it becomes criminal. The dead woman's name on the register was Mrs. E. Harris. Evelyn Harrow, almost certainly. The revelation altered every face in the carriage. Celia went still as iron cooling. Kells began to weep without sound. Blackwood asked for more brandy. Lady Beatrice said, with astonishing firmness, "Then whoever killed Mr. Renshaw also killed her, unless the matter is more monstrous than even you suggest, Monsieur Poirot. I believe, said Poirot, that monstrosity rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates by decisions people call necessary. He then did a curious thing. Instead of confronting any suspect, he asked for the tea service from cabin 13 to be laid out again exactly as found. Broken cup, intact cup, silver pot, saucer, teaspoon, sugar tongs. For a long while he merely looked. Then he asked Lady Beatrice to pour tea. She complied with chilly amusement. As she lifted the pot, the little finger of her left hand extended slightly for balance. Now with your right, Poirot said. My right is less steady. Nevertheless. The movement was awkward. Lady Beatrice colored very faintly. Surely hand preference is not a capital offense. No. Yet the stab to Monsieur Renshaw entered from a low leftward angle, and the broken handle of the cup in cabin 13 fell outward in a pattern more natural to a left-handed struggle than a right-handed one. Also, the lipstick mark most recently laid upon the intact cup sits where a left-handed woman would naturally place the handle when lifting it after another had set it down. Small things, madam? But small things, when they agree, are terribly impolite to innocence. The compartment seemed to contract around her. Blackwood intervened at once. This is absurd. Beatrice is left-handed for embroidery and useless tasks only. Hardly a murderer on that account. Poirot smiled without warmth. And did I say she was? I said only that the hidden hand matters. On this train, everyone has hidden a hand somewhere. That night, as the others withdrew under watch, Poirot asked me to walk with him through the now silent corridor. Snow light entered in strips between drawn blinds. The train clanged over points with a metallic melancholy almost human. The hidden clue was present from the beginning, he said. The pillow in 13 carried no violet scent. The woman who wore the perfume did not lie there long enough to sleep. She performed occupancy, she did not inhabit it. Celia masqueraded. Then another woman, also perfumed and veiled, entered later to continue the masquerade. Why? To move unseen while being seen. It is the most elegant sort of concealment. Then the second woman killed Renshaw? Almost certainly. But first ask why Renshaw went near the linen passage at all. He had discovered something. Perhaps that cabin 13's occupant was false, perhaps that the papers he wanted were elsewhere. He met someone there, struggled, was stabbed, and the body was shifted. The watch was broken earlier during the fight, but Eleanor saw him later because he was alive after the watch stopped. Voila, the contradiction explained. And the pearl clasp? A sign of physical closeness. Not proof yet of identity. A man may seize any ornament within reach. Still, pearls cling to our case with irritating persistence. We had reached the rear vestibule when Celia stepped from shadow. Her face, stripped now of stage color and defiance, seemed younger than her reputation allowed. I know what you're thinking, she said. That I played a dangerous game and helped kill the woman who wrote to me. Perhaps I did. Her voice thickened, then steadied. Evelyn meant to tell me the truth in Paris. She sent the disguise instructions because she believed she was followed. I found her room after the porter delivered the note. The fire was dying. The window was open. She was on the floor beside the grate, already cold. I panicked. I took the case, the cloak, the veil. I read enough to see the names. I thought if I went aboard, one of them would reveal why she died. Why conceal this? I asked. Because if I went to police with no proof, I would become a scandalous actress inventing a birthright. And because I wanted to look into their faces before they had time to arrange their lies. Poirot regarded her for a long moment. Did Evelyn tell you, in any letter, who your mother was? Not directly. Only that a child was moved from one mother to another after a bombardment at St. Marguerite. Only that a woman now honored for mercy built her life over that exchange. She did not need to turn toward Lady Beatrice's compartment for the accusation to land there. Poirot asked one final question. When you played the woman in 13, whom did you meet? Dr. Villette. And Mr. Renshaw. The doctor recognized Evelyn's name, and begged me to leave the train at once. He said nothing good could come from truth 20 years late. Renshaw was different. He smiled as though we shared a trade. He wanted the papers. He said he could arrange a handsome settlement if I kept silent. Her mouth twisted. That was when I understood he had been paid once already. And after you left? I went to wash the paint away. When I came back, the door of 13 was closed, and I heard movement inside. I thought someone had found me out. Then I heard Lady Beatrice's maid in the corridor, so I turned away. That was my cowardice. If I had opened the door. Perhaps you would now be dead also, said Poirot. He let her pass. Yet once she had gone, his expression altered. She omitted one thing, he said. What thing? Whom she hoped, in her secret heart, to find innocent. People lie most deeply around their hope. Before dawn we learned what buried secret Evelyn Harrow had carried across 2 decades of silence. The name cut from the orphanage register was Clara. And the surname, recovered from another torn page in Kells's box, was Ashcombe. Section 6. The Buried Secret. Reverend Kells gave way at last, not under accusation, but under relief. Some souls endure guilt for years only by turning confession into a task for tomorrow. When tomorrow finally arrives, collapse can feel like grace. Poirot brought the clergyman into the salon before sunrise, set tea before him, and said simply, Now, Monsieur l'Abbé, we shall stop protecting the dead at the expense of the living. Kells folded his hands as if beginning prayer and instead began history. In the last winter of the war, St. Marguerite Mission served as orphanage, hospital annex, and refuge for women fleeing the front. Shelling reached even its chapel windows. On one terrible night 2 infants lay in cots only feet apart. One was the daughter of Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, born prematurely while her husband served abroad. The child, Kells said, had been frail from the first. The other was the daughter of a chorus singer named Eva Dane, who died of shrapnel wounds after arriving with the infant and no papers beyond a stage card. Evelyn Harrow was among the nurses on duty. Dr. Villette, then a younger surgeon attached to the field hospital, came in during the bombardment. Colonel Blackwood, wounded in the shoulder, was also there. Near dawn Lady Beatrice's child died. The bombing had shattered windows, records, and reason. Beatrice, feverish and half delirious, believed her daughter still lived. Her husband had been killed the month before. The Ashcombe estate, or a certain branch of it, would pass differently if there were no heir. Panic entered where grief had already done its work. Kells stopped there, but Blackwood, who had come in unannounced and listened from the doorway, finished the sentence. I suggested the exchange, he said. No one moved. He stood very straight despite the cane. In that moment he looked less like a soldier and more like a man finally seeing the blast radius of a single decision. The orphan child had no family we could find. The Ashcombe child was dead. Beatrice would have broken. The estate trustees would have descended like crows. I told myself the war had already ruined all categories. One baby for another, what was a name against survival? Villette objected. Kells prayed. Renshaw handled the papers later. Evelyn Harrow threatened to report us, but by then the shelling had destroyed half the records and the living wanted peace more than accuracy. Lady Beatrice entered before he had finished. She had heard enough. Her face was bloodless, yet her voice did not fail. "You make it sound as though I ordered it," she said. Blackwood looked at her with something like pity and something like accusation. "You did not. You only never asked again once you understood." For a long moment she said nothing. "Then, I buried a husband and nearly my mind in that place. They put a child in my arms," she cried. I held her. "If I knew then, I refused to know fully. Does that satisfy your moral geometry?" No one answered. There lay the buried secret at last. Celia Dane had been raised elsewhere because the nameless orphan from St. Marguerite had been taken into the Ashcombe line as Clara Ashcombe. But what had become of that child? Lady Beatrice's face supplied the answer before language did. "She died at 7, she said. Scarlet fever." Celia flinched as though struck by an invisible hand. "So your theft bought you nothing," she said. Lady Beatrice turned toward her, and for the first time the great public benefactress vanished. In her place stood a woman stripped to nerve. "You think so? I lived 7 years with the daughter I loved. Then I buried her too. If you wish to hate me, do it honestly. Hate me for weakness, not for profit." But profit had indeed entered the story. Renshaw had altered inheritance papers, insurance claims, and charitable trusts to protect the substitution from scrutiny. Blackwood had used influence. Kells had erased entries. Villette had signed a medical certificate that blurred time of death. Evelyn Harrow alone had refused payment. She vanished from their lives shortly thereafter. Or so they believed. "She wrote to me last month," said Lady Beatrice in a low voice. "She said there was another child. That we had not taken the right one. That the singer's daughter had survived, yes, but so had someone else who should have been accounted for. She demanded I meet her privately." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Another child?" Kells shook his head miserably. "There was a second orphan transferred through the mission that week, but not in the nursery. A little girl of 6 or 7. No relation. Evelyn may have used the detail to frighten you. Or perhaps there was more confusion in the records than even I knew." This threat of a wider tangle briefly shifted suspicion again. Had Evelyn blackmailed them with invented complications? Had Renshaw killed to keep funds hidden? Had Blackwood, fearing exposure as architect of the exchange, silenced her in Paris and then Renshaw aboard the train? The old sin had created enough motive for half the carriage. Villette finally confessed his own lie. He had indeed met the veiled woman in cabin 13, believing at first she was Evelyn Harrow. When he recognized Celia beneath the makeup, she showed him one page from the copied register and demanded to know whether Lady Beatrice was her mother. "I told her no certainty was possible," he said. "That was another cowardice." Then Renshaw arrived. They argued. I left because I lacked the stomach for one more transaction in that man's presence. Later, when Celia panicked after hearing someone in the compartment, while she was washing off the paint, she came to me. She was shaking so badly I gave her chloral from my case. The missing ampoule, that was why. The blood on my handkerchief came after Renshaw was found. I touched his collar to feel for a pulse. His confession explained much and exonerated little. You see? Said Blackwood harshly. Every one of us lied. Any one of us might therefore be guilty. Ah, said Poirot, but not all lies are cut from the same cloth. Some hide shame. Some hide love. Some hide murder. We must be tailors of motive. By afternoon the storm weakened. Pale sun spread across the drifts like diluted milk. With the easing weather came fresh danger. An external telegraph brought fuller news from Paris. The dead woman at the Hotel du Cygne had suffered blunt force trauma before death. Not apoplexy. Homicide. And the room had been disturbed after the murder, as if papers were sought. That information struck Lady Beatrice hardest of all. She asked twice whether any witness had seen who visited the hotel. When told the records were incomplete, she sat very still and pressed the handkerchief to her mouth. Poirot noted the handkerchief. White linen, monogrammed B.A., faintly scented with violets. You prefer that perfume? He asked. For years, she said, not understanding yet how dangerous the admission was. My daughter liked it when she was ill. The veil in cabin 13, the sleeves stain on Eleanor, the scented air. Violets belong not to Evelyn Harrow's imagined fear, but to Lady Beatrice's habits. Celia, using Evelyn's disguise, must have borrowed the perfume from somewhere else, or more likely, the second woman who entered after her had carried her own scent into the compartment, and overwritten what remained. That evening Poirot gathered us in the salon and announced, to general astonishment, that he believed the murder of Basil Renshaw solved. He named Dr. Villette. The doctor's face emptied. No, I said aloud before I could stop myself. Poirot's glance flicked toward me, unreadable. To the others he said only, the evidence is sufficient. Opportunity, secrecy, the sedative, the blood, the old connection, the wish to prevent exposure. Monsieur Bissett, for the present you will confine the doctor to his compartment. Villette went without protest. It was the passivity of a man who thinks punishment might be easier than recollection. The others, relieved and unconvinced in unequal measure, dispersed. Only when we were alone did I demand the truth of Poirot. You do not believe it? No. Then why accuse him? Poirot straightened the salt cellar before answering. Because the false solution is sometimes the bait by which the true one comes to feed. Tonight, my friend, someone who feels safe will take a risk. And if I have judged correctly, the next attempt will not be upon the doctor. It will be upon the girl who has remembered too much. Section 7. The False Solution. If I had known then what I know now, I would not have let Eleanor out of my sight even for the time it takes to strike a match. Poirot's accusation against Villette transformed the carriage, but not in the way Bissett expected. Certainly the manager was delighted to have a culprit of suitable education and visible nerves. Blackwood seemed grimly satisfied. Kells retreated into exhausted silence. Celia called the arrest a trick and refused to elaborate. Lady Beatrice alone looked less relieved than sharpened, as if she had been given bad directions to a destination she already knew too well. Villette was confined to his compartment under Bissett's supervision, though Poirot insisted the door remain unlocked from the outside and the key visible. If a man is guilty, he observed blandly, we need not behave like stage policemen. If he is innocent, We need not behave like fools. He then arranged a most peculiar vigilance. Eleanor was instructed to continue her duties as normally as possible. Celia was to remain in the salon with a book she did not read. Blackwood and Lady Beatrice were asked, in the interest of railway peace, not to leave their compartments after 11. Kells was given the task of copying from memory every detail he could recall of St. Marguerite's nursery on the night of the bombardment. Bissett, flattered by procedural importance, agreed to patrol the passage himself. "And what do we do?" I asked. "We wait where the murderer thinks no one is patient enough to wait." That place proved to be the narrow vestibule beyond the baggage steps, a miserable pocket of cold iron and rattling glass where one could see both the rear corridor and the door to the service alcove through a crack in the curtain. We stood there for an hour, then 2. The train roared through cuttings and slowed at nameless sidings. Somewhere ahead the storm broke apart against mountains. Lamps burned low. My feet numbed. Poirot seemed sustained entirely by neatness and suspicion. At midnight Eleanor appeared, carrying folded blankets. She moved more slowly than usual because of her bandaged hand. At the service cupboard she paused, frowned, and looked down. Someone had dropped a folded note on the floor just beyond the threshold. She bent to pick it up. From the darkness above the baggage steps a figure lunged. The attack was almost soundless. A gloved hand struck at her mouth while the other shoved. Eleanor twisted, the blankets flew, and the assailant's footing failed on the moving carriage. For one sick instant both shapes pitched toward the metal steps leading to the luggage hold. Poirot sprang with astonishing ferocity. I caught Eleanor's arm as she slid. The attacker tore free, leaving behind not a face but fragments, black sleeve, scent of violets, and the flash of something pale at one ear. The figure fled forward through the passage. Blackwood came bursting from his compartment at the noise. Bissett from the opposite end. Celia flung open the salon door. We had the entire corridor awake within seconds, and yet the attacker had vanished into a line of locked or occupied compartments with the insolence of a conjuring trick. Eleanor, though shaking violently, opened the note. It contained only 4 words: "She is not the child." Poirot took the paper. "Excellent," he said. "Excellent?" cried Bissett. "For me, yes. Less so for the murderer." He drew everyone into the salon at once. No one, he declared, would return alone to any compartment until morning. Bissett sputtered objections about regulations. Poirot ignored him with the complete calm of a man who knows regulations are strongest just before they break. The arrest of Dr. Villette was false, he said before the assembled group. There was an uproar. Blackwood half rose. Lady Beatrice's face went strangely flat. Villette, exhausted and grey, looked not triumphant but sick. I accused the doctor because I wished to see who would become bold enough to strike next, Poirot continued. Someone has now attempted to murder Mademoiselle Belle, just as earlier someone arranged a falling trunk to crush her. Why? Because she heard or saw what did not fit. A killer may forgive suspicion. Memory is less convenient. He held up the note. And here, our theatrical enemy tries to add confusion. She is not the child. Which child? The line is meant to push us away from the St. Marguerite exchange, or deeper into it, depending on how we panic. I prefer neither. Blackwood demanded whether Poirot meant to accuse Lady Beatrice by perfume alone. Kells muttered that God would not be mocked by such games. Celia watched Lady Beatrice with a hunger so fierce it bordered on pity. Villette then said something unexpected. "The person who attacked Eleanor cannot be me," he said. "Bissett took the key from outside my door only after the commotion. Ask him. But I can tell you something else. On the night of the bombing, Lady Beatrice was not the only mother in that ward. Eva Dane, the singer, lived long enough to beg that her baby be named Clara if she died. I heard it. I signed the tag myself." Celia shut her eyes. "Then I was named," she whispered. "At least once." Lady Beatrice looked at her then not as one looks at a claimant or an actress, but as one looks at a ghost that has learned to speak. Poirot let the silence deepen until it hurt. Then he placed the note beside the broken clasp from Renshaw's cuff, the burnt certificate scraps, and the grease paint cloth. "Let us destroy the leading theory properly," he said. "If Lady Beatrice killed Renshaw in the corridor while disguised as the woman from cabin 13, she must also have had time to return to her compartment, compose herself, and be seen elsewhere. Yet who saw her? Only her maid, and only after the disturbance. If Blackwood killed Renshaw, how explain the perfume and the earring? If Celia killed him, how explain Eleanor's witness placing her in the lavatory? If Villette killed him, why attack Eleanor now? Each theory solves one door by locking 3 others. Therefore the murderer depends upon our desire for a single straight line." He turned to Kells. "And you, Monsieur l'Abbé, omitted one fact even in confession. There was another document preserved from Sainte Marguerite, was there not?" Kels's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "A rosary pouch," he said finally. "Eva Dane wore one around her neck. Inside was a scrap of paper with the surname, Dane, and a lock of dark hair. I gave it to Evelyn Harrow after the shelling. I thought if the child were ever found, she should have something of her mother." "And Evelyn kept it?" "Yes. Unless someone took it from her room." Celia rose so abruptly her chair toppled. "I searched that room before I boarded. I found nothing of the kind." "Then either the murderer removed it," said Poirot, "or Evelyn gave it to someone she trusted before she died." A new direction opened then, and swept aside the old. If a keepsake naming Eva Dane had existed, Celia's identity as the singer's child could perhaps be proven. Inheritance, scandal, absolution, vengeance, every motive in the carriage flared anew. At 3 in the morning, exhausted beyond civility, we distributed ourselves on salon benches and corridor chairs. Poirot did not sleep. He wrote several lines on railway stationery, folded them, and placed one beneath the edge of the mirrored clock in the salon where any observant eye might discover it if searching later. I asked no questions. By then I knew enough to trust that when Poirot leaves a thing to be found, he intends the finder to reveal more than the note itself. The morning brought a second shock before the coffee. During a routine inspection of the luggage hold, Bissett found a flower crate overlooked the night before beneath the baggage netting. Its contents had frozen hard during the storm. Packed around wilted hothouse lilies and hotel wrapping paper lay the body of Evelyn Harrow. She had never missed the train at all. She had traveled with us from the beginning, dead and hidden under flowers, while another woman wore her veil in cabin 13. Section 8. The Trap. The presence of Evelyn Harrow's body in the flower crate did more than deepen the horror, it repaired the timeline. She had been killed in Paris. Her body had been packed with lilies and loaded as private freight under a label meant for Lady Beatrice's charitable arrangements in Vienna. Someone on the train either knew where she had been hidden or needed to confirm that no one else did. Celia had therefore impersonated a dead woman. The second veiled visitor in cabin 13 had used that disguise not to continue Evelyn's deception, but to profit from the belief that Evelyn still lived. Poirot, having arrived at that conclusion, chose once more not to announce it fully. Instead, he set a trap constructed from truth, vanity, and desperation. At luncheon he spoke loudly enough for half the carriage to overhear that among Evelyn Harrow's effects there had been found a rosary pouch containing proof of maternity and a complete certified copy of the St. Marguerite baptism register. This was a lie in part and a wager in whole. Kells looked at him sharply but held his tongue. Celia paled. Blackwood's hand closed around his cane. Lady Beatrice lowered her fork with exquisite control. "Where are these papers now?" asked Bissett, unable to conceal the appetite of a mediocre man for dramatic objects. "In a safe place," said Poirot. "That afternoon he instructed me, within hearing distance of the corridor, to place a sealed envelope marked Harrow Papers beneath the mirrored clock in the salon until evening. The envelope contained blank railway forms and one line in Poirot's hand: 'The one who seeks this seeks also the rope for her own hanging.' Then we waited. Waiting is the true work of detection. Clues may sparkle, confessions may tremble, but patience is the slow knife that opens what panic keeps shut. Toward dusk the train crossed a long viaduct over a valley washed clean by the storm. Mountains rose in blue layers. The first clear sunset of the journey turned every window into copper. In that strange beauty the passengers appeared briefly like ordinary travelers again, tired, confined, touched by landscape. It made the undercurrent of murder feel indecent, which is perhaps why murder so often chooses beautiful settings. Contrast lends it force. Eleanor, despite 2 attempts on her life, insisted on her rounds. Poirot compromised by assigning me to shadow her with all the subtlety of a wardrobe. She endured it with tolerable humor. "When I was little," she said while setting down cups, "I wanted to be a bookseller because no one ever suspects books of anything. Now I have spent 3 days among respectable luggage and know better." "You still mean to open the shop?" She smiled faintly. "If Sam can breathe sea air before next winter, yes. If not, perhaps I shall open it in my mind and charge admission. There are people whose courage arrives in speeches. Hers arrived in dry remarks made while carrying other people's china." As evening deepened, Celia asked for a private word with Blackwood. Poirot allowed it, though at the salon table in plain sight. I could not hear every phrase, but I heard enough. "Did you know my mother?" she asked. Blackwood answered after a long delay. "Yes." "Was she kind?" A muscle moved in his jaw. "Kinder than I deserved." Nothing more passed aloud, but the colonel looked 20 years older when she left him. At 9:30 the salon emptied by degrees. Bissett went to confer with the conductor. Kells retired to prayer. Villette remained with Poirot over coffee, speaking quietly about hospital supply records and dates that might authenticate or destroy old signatures. Blackwood paced the corridor once, twice, then disappeared into his compartment. Lady Beatrice sat alone beneath the lamp with mending she never once threaded. The envelope remained beneath the mirrored clock. At 10:45 Poirot extinguished 2 lamps and declared himself exhausted. Villette accompanied Bissett to verify the medicines in the lock-staff cabinet. I took up position beyond the half-drawn curtain near the rear of the salon. Eleanor waited with Poirot in the shadow of the adjoining passage, though no one seeing the room would have guessed it. We heard only wheels, silverware settling, and once the distant slam of a carriage door farther forward. Then came the movement. Lady Beatrice entered first, not creeping, not glancing about, but walking with the assurance of a woman long practiced in rooms she believed belonged to her. She stopped beneath the clock, lifted the envelope, and weighed it in her left hand. Before she could break the seal, Blackwood stepped from the opposite doorway. "Beatrice," he said. She did not start. That, more than anything, told against her. "You were following me." "I was trying to prevent this." "This? Or truth? You never could distinguish when it cost you something." He held out his hand. "Give it to me." Instead, she drew the envelope back. In the same instant, something changed in her face. Not fear. Calculation abandoning courtesy. "You took it from Paris," she said softly. "The pouch. I knew you had. Was it sentiment? Guilt? Or did you imagine you might finally become brave in middle age?" Blackwood went white. Poirot stepped into the light. "Merci, madame. I was hoping one of you would name the object without being asked." Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened on the envelope, crushing the seal. Blackwood closed his eyes as if a door in him had opened onto a drop. "So," said Poirot, "the rosary pouch existed. The Colonel removed it from Evelyn Harrow's hotel room after her death. Why?" Blackwood did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was stripped of all ornament. "Because I had received a letter from Evelyn the week before. She told me Celia Dane was Eva's child. My child. She demanded money to meet and papers to confess the exchange fully. I went to the hotel intending to persuade her to leave it buried. I found her dead. The room had been searched, but the little pouch had fallen behind the grate. I took it before the police came because I knew what it proved. Celia, who had entered unseen behind us, made a sound I shall never forget. Not a sob, not a cry. The sound of an identity cracking open under pressure too long applied. Lady Beatrice looked at her then, and in that look lay an entire battlefield of possession, envy, grief, and dread. "There is your second shock," Poirot said very softly. The actress was not merely the orphaned child of Eva Dane. She was also the daughter of Colonel Blackwood. Suddenly old loyalties, old hushes, and old payments acquire new colors, do they not? The theory many of us had clung to, that Lady Beatrice acted alone out of simple self-protection, shuddered. Blackwood had motive to retrieve the pouch. He had motive to silence Evelyn. He had motive to keep Celia from scandal or claim. He had lied from the first, and now admitted presence at the scene in Paris. It would have been very easy then to take the simpler road and call him the killer. Poirot did not. "You found Evelyn dead," he said. "What else?" Blackwood stared at the broken envelope in Lady Beatrice's hand. A scent of violets in the room. And one pearl on the carpet beside the bed. I thought it impossible. Then I told myself I had imagined it. We become absurdly inventive in defense of those we have loved. Lady Beatrice closed her fist. "Adrian," she said, and for the first time her voice truly shook, "if you say another word, you condemn not only me. You condemn that ruined ward, that dead child, every foolish merciful thing done in terror." "No," said Poirot. "He condemns only what followed. And what followed, madam, is not mercy." She tore the envelope open. Blank forms fluttered to the carpet. In the beat of silence that followed, all pretense ended. Section 9. The Second Shock. There are moments in an investigation when truth does not arrive like dawn, gradual and forgiving, but like a mirror pushed suddenly before a face that has rehearsed every angle except the real one. Lady Beatrice looked down at the empty forms in her hand and understood the trap not merely as strategy but as insult. For a woman who had governed committees, charities, servants, doctors, and grief itself, being maneuvered publicly by a little Belgian with immaculate cuffs was almost more than accusation. "You staged this," she said, as if human ruin were a parlor amusement. "No," said Poirot. "I staged it because you have staged every other room since Paris." Bissett, summoned by the raised voices, entered wide-eyed. Villette behind him. Kells next, then Eleanor and Celia, and finally Blackwood, who remained standing apart as though distance might still atone for history. Poirot asked them all to sit. No one obeyed completely. Lady Beatrice remained by the clock. She had ceased pretending not to know the terrain. "You have your theatre," she said. "Proceed." Poirot did so, but not yet to the end. He began with Paris. Evelyn Harrow sent letters to Blackwood, Beatrice, Renshaw, and perhaps Kells, demanding a reckoning. She arranged to meet Celia at the Hotel du Cygne and brought with her the copied register, the photograph, and the rosary pouch naming Eva Dane. Someone visited that room before departure. Evelyn was struck, her room searched, and her body hidden in a flower crate consigned to Lady Beatrice's own charitable freight allotment, an allotment only a person of status aboard the train could exploit without scrutiny. Lady Beatrice did not interrupt. Poirot continued to the train. Celia, acting on Evelyn's note, took the dead woman's cloak and roll and boarded as the veiled passenger in cabin 13. She met Villette and Renshaw. After leaving briefly to remove stage paint, she returned to find someone else in the compartment continuing the impersonation. That second woman wore violet scent, used a lower voice, and wished other passengers to believe the mysterious woman remained alive and secretive. Renshaw, already aware of the old conspiracy, recognized an opportunity. He had been paid once for silence, and meant to be paid again. He encountered the second veiled woman near the linen passage, struggled with her, seized at her earring, and had his watch smashed in the fight. He lived long enough to be seen later, then was lured or forced to the service end and stabbed with the salon letter opener. The body was shifted. The missing key was planted on Eleanor. The black mourning thread on the latch and trunk confirmed the killer's continued use of the veiled disguise. When Poirot feigned certainty about Villette, the same person attacked Eleanor twice because the girl had heard the lower voice and nearly seen who wore it. All this he laid out step by step, and still one could feel the carriage yearning for a different ending. Even now, with suspicions circling Lady Beatrice like winter crows, there remained the question of Blackwood's hotel visit, of the pouch in his possession, of his concealed fatherhood. Human beings prefer a complicated guilt shared by two to a solitary guilt carried elegantly by one. It seems fairer, and therefore somehow easier to bear. Then Lady Beatrice asked the most dangerous question of the night. "And if Colonel Blackwood found the pouch in Paris, why assume I killed the nurse before he arrived? Perhaps he lies to protect the actress. Perhaps he killed Evelyn, took the keepsake, and now hopes sentiment will wash blood from his hands." The argument was effective. Blackwood had indeed withheld vital truth. Celia herself turned toward him, her face shaken and searching. "Did you?" she asked. He did not answer at once. The delay nearly destroyed him. No, he said finally. But I understand why you ask. Poirot raised one finger. There is the final contradiction before the truth. The colonel found the pouch, but not the papers. Why not? Because someone else had already taken them. Someone who knew exactly what to seek. Someone who also knew enough to load the body with flowers scheduled for Lady Beatrice's philanthropic freight compartment. Someone who could later use cabin 13 to continue the illusion of Evelyn's survival. He turned toward the benefactress. And someone left-handed, whose pearl earring lost its clasp in Renshaw's cuff, whose violet perfume saturated the compartment after Celia left it, and whose handkerchief matched the scent from the hotel room. Lady Beatrice's maid, who until then had hovered near the door in mute distress, burst suddenly into tears. I told her not to go out again, the maid cried. I begged her. She said the gentleman would ruin us all if he got the papers. She said she only meant to speak with him. Lady Beatrice shut her eyes. No confession came. Not yet. Pride is often the last organ to fail. Instead, she said, you have perfume and embroidery as your gallows. Is that all? No, said Poirot. I have the note you slipped beneath the clock after reading my false envelope. He reached into his pocket and produced the paper he had planted. On the back, newly written in a hard slanting hand, were the words, Meet me at once where we began. Bring the pouch. No more delays. You wrote this after discovering no papers inside, Poirot said. You intended Blackwood to find it, follow, and be either persuaded or destroyed. But in haste you used the pencil from your own reticule. The same violet lacquer pencil with which you drafted and tore up letters yesterday afternoon. Mademoiselle Belle remembered the color because she emptied the waste tray. All eyes went to Eleanor. She flushed, but nodded. Yes. Milady asked for more paper twice. The pencil left a glitter on her fingers. I noticed because the salver cloth picked it up. Another small detail. Another nail. Lady Beatrice looked almost amused then, though the amusement was ruinous. So the girl saves herself by observing housekeeping. How appropriate. Celia took one step forward. Why? She asked. Not fiercely. Not even angrily. The force had gone out of anger and left only need. Not the old exchange. I understand fear. Why now? Why kill the woman who wrote to me? Why kill Renshaw? Why try to kill her? She looked toward Eleanor on the final word, and the room seemed briefly to recognize how far innocence had already been made to travel. Lady Beatrice's answer came after a pause so long I thought she might never spend a breath. Because I was tired, she said. The simplicity of it silenced us more completely than a scream could have done. Tired of letters. Tired of the dead returning in fragments. Tired of men who called themselves practical and left women to carry the memory. Tired of seeing in every hospital corridor the face of a child I buried after loving one I had no right to love. Evelyn wanted confession, Renshaw wanted payment, Adrian wanted absolution without consequence, and now you wanted a mother. Her gaze moved to Celia. Do you know what that is to a woman who has already buried the name once? Celia's mouth trembled, but her voice did not. It is not licensed to kill. No, said Lady Beatrice, and the words sounded like someone stepping off a height. It is not. Yet even then Poirot was not satisfied. You are close to truth, madam, he said softly. But not the deepest part. Why attack Mademoiselle Belle? She was nothing to the old exchange. Why? Lady Beatrice looked toward Eleanor, and in that glance lay the answer before the confession. Because she looked at me, she said. After the scream in 13. She looked straight at me as if she had seen through the veil. I had been invisible for 20 years in drawing rooms, hospitals, committees, seen, praised, never actually seen. And that railway girl, with one bruise under her eye and sugar in her pocket, looked at me as though I were made of ordinary sin. I could not bear it. No one in the room breathed for a moment. That, I think, was the true second shock. Not that Lady Beatrice had killed, but that beneath the grandeur and philanthropy and cultivated grief lived a vanity so starved and ferocious that being recognized by a servant became more intolerable than murder. Poirot bowed his head once. Merci. Now we may finish. Section 10. The Assembly of Truth. Poirot insisted that everyone remain exactly where they were. The train had begun its final approach toward Vienna. One could feel it in the altered rhythm of the rails and in the faint quickening of staff beyond our carriage. Dawn was several hours away. The lamps cast each face into its own private theater. No jury, no magistrate, no uniformed inspector could have made the space feel more judicial than Poirot did merely by arranging attention. We will have the whole, he said, or we will have nothing worthy of the dead. He turned first to Blackwood. The colonel admitted the affair with Eva Dane during the war, an affair brief enough to seem forgettable at the time and permanent enough to alter 3 decades. He never knew of the pregnancy until Evelyn's recent letter. He received the summons to Paris, delayed too long from shame, arrived after the murder, found the pouch behind the grate, and kept it because it proved Celia's parentage and would explode whatever remained of Lady Beatrice's carefully assembled public life. I told myself I wanted to protect the girl, he said. In truth, I also wanted to protect myself from discovering whether protection was all I had to offer. Celia listened without weeping. You had 20 years to be a father in the abstract, she said. Now you may begin by being truthful in the concrete. He bowed his head. Of all the sentences spoken that night, none landed more cleanly. Kells then completed the record. He described the nursery, the broken windows, the dead child in Lady Beatrice's cradle, the pressure from trustees, Blackwood's proposal, Valet's resistance, Renshaw's later manipulation of documents, and his own cowardly removal of names from the mission register. He had preserved the torn pages only because some part of him knew conscience is a miser. It hates to throw away what it may one day need to pay with. Valet corroborated the medical details. The time of the infant's conditions, the sedative given to Celia aboard the train, the absence of poison from his supplies, and the fact that Evelyn Harrow had once written him saying she could no longer endure the old lie while hospitals built in the name of mercy stood upon it. Then Poirot reconstructed the crimes. Lady Beatrice, having received Evelyn's warning letter, arranged a meeting at the Hotel du Cygne before the train departed. She went alone, veiled, carrying her own violet scent and a pair of pearl earrings she wore often when traveling. She intended, perhaps, to buy silence. But Evelyn demanded public confession and proof. In the quarrel that followed, Beatrice struck her with the iron fire tool by the grate. The nurse fell and died. Beatrice searched the room, seized the copied register and photograph, but missed the rosary pouch hidden near the hearth. Realizing that police inquiry at once would expose her presence, she used her charitable freight credentials to have the body packed among flower crates bound for Vienna, planning to dispose of matters later. Celia, arriving after the fact, found the corpse, the note, the disguised materials, and enough scraps to board the train in Evelyn's stead. Aboard, Renshaw quickly recognized opportunity. He may not have known the woman in 13 was Celia at first, but he knew the old matter had returned and that papers existed. He pressed for money. When Celia left to remove grease paint, Lady Beatrice entered cabin 13 wearing the veil and cloak, intending to recover whatever remained and to continue the fiction that Evelyn, or the woman posing as her, still occupied the compartment. Eleanor heard the lower voice. She nearly saw too much. Renshaw confronted Beatrice near the linen passage, likely threatening exposure unless paid anew. In the struggle he seized her earring. The clasp lodged in his cuff and the pearl was lost. His watch broke at 1:14. Still alive, he staggered away, met her again or was drawn back by promise of payment, and was stabbed with the salon letter opener in the service passage. Beatrice planted the missing key in Eleanor's alcove, left the black thread on the latch, and returned to her compartment before the general alarm fixed identities in place. When Poirot's questions turned toward Eleanor's memory, Beatrice tried first the falling trunk, then the attack on the baggage steps, then the planted note. Each move was designed not only to silence a witness but to deepen confusion around lineage and motive. And why not destroy the papers entirely at once? I asked. Poirot answered without looking at me. Because people who build their lives upon appearances are addicted to the possibility of control. To burn a paper is final. To keep it a little longer suggests one may still arrange, persuade, rewrite. Madame wished to preserve options. Murderers often do. It is one reason they are caught. Lady Beatrice had listened without interruption, one hand resting lightly on the ruined envelope. When Poirot finished, she let out a breath that sounded older than any of us. Almost all of it is true, she said. Almost? Said Poirot. Renshaw was not lured back by money. He laughed at me. Her mouth tightened. That is a small distinction, but I prefer accuracy at the end. He laughed and said if I wanted the papers quiet, I should pay him what he had always deserved. He reached for my veil. I thought of every committee room, every chapel, every nursery where I had built something useful from the wreck. I thought of the child I buried at 7 and the child before her who had not lived even long enough to betray me. Then I took the letter opener and drove it up under his ribs because his face had become unbearable. There. Does that satisfy the geometry now? No one answered. Celia stood motionless. Her expression held no victory. It held the exhaustion of a person who has finally reached the locked room at the center of her life and found not treasure, but damage arranged in heirloom form. Poirot's voice softened. One thing remains. You wrote to yourself, did you not, madam? The note delivered at Meaux? Lady Beatrice looked up slowly. Yes. I wanted the supposed Evelyn watched but isolated. If anyone later remembered, they would remember secrecy. And the second cup? Mine. I went in after Celia left, meaning to search quickly. Renshaw knocked. I let him in because I needed to know what he knew. He drank my tea. He noticed the makeup towel and understood more than I had intended. Each clue fell into place with the bleak click of mechanism. The scentless pillow, Celia had never slept there. The grease-paint cloth, the actress's disguise. The soot, the hotel room fire. The second cup, Beatrice's visit. The broken watch, first struggle, not death. The pearl clasp, Renshaw's grasp on his killer. The morning thread, the reused veil, the planted key, the false suspect, the sedative vial, Valette calming Celia, not murdering, the torn register, Kells's cowardice, the left-handedness, the angle of attack and the awkward teacup. All that remained was the last human question, which evidence alone can never settle. Celia asked it. "Did you ever love me?" she said. The room did not move. Lady Beatrice's face altered as if struck from within. "I loved a child I called Clara," she said. "I do not know whether that reaches you or condemns me further." Celia's eyes shone but did not spill. "It does both," she said. Poirot closed his notebook. "Then we have arrived," he said. But Lady Beatrice had one final revelation yet to offer, and it would change not the facts of the murders, but the meaning of one life among us. Section 11. The Final Revelation. When Lady Beatrice spoke again, she was no longer addressing Poirot. She was speaking to Eleanor. "On the first night," she said, "when you steadied my maid with that dreadful soup tureen and apologized though the fault was hers, I thought you reminded me of someone. Not in face. In manner. Evelyn." Her mouth trembled once and recovered. "It was why I noticed you at all. Later, when you looked straight through the veil, I hated you for carrying into middle age the same plain courage she had at 22. Strange, isn't it? We tell ourselves we kill to protect estates, names, daughters. Sometimes we kill because another person's decency becomes a witness we cannot buy." Eleanor said nothing. Her bandaged hand rested at her side. She looked very young then, and very old. Poirot gave Bissett instructions to send for police at the first controlled stop. The manager, pale and obedient now, hurried away. Blackwood moved as if to speak to Celia, thought better of it, and stopped. Kells prayed without words. Valette sat down heavily and removed his spectacles, covering his eyes. Lady Beatrice drew from her reticule not a weapon but a folded legal paper. "One of the letters I tore up," she said. "I wrote it before supper and could not decide whether to destroy it. It is an amendment to my Vienna trust. I had intended, if matters turned against me, to leave a portion to the bell boy's treatment through the hospital fund, anonymously. That is not virtue. I would have done it partly because the sister was troublesome to my conscience. Still, it exists. Monsieur Poirot, see that it is honored, if the law permits anything of my estate to be honorable at all." Eleanor made an involuntary sound of protest. "I don't want blood money." Poirot looked at her with grave approval. "Then do not take it as blood money. Take it, if you take it, as restitution wrested from vanity and turned toward breath. There is a moral difference." Celia crossed the distance between them before anyone expected it, and took the paper from Lady Beatrice's hand. "If this is real," she said, "it goes to Sam Bell. And another portion goes to St. Marguerite's surviving children if any can be traced. Not in your name. In Evelyn Harrow's." She at least tried to end this honestly. Lady Beatrice closed her eyes. "Yes," she said. "In Evelyn's name." It was the nearest thing to grace the night produced. As dawn approached, the train slowed outside Vienna beneath a sky clearing to hard silver. The city's first outskirts passed in smokestacks, frozen roofs, church spires black against morning. One might almost have believed, seeing the ordinary labor of day return, that the last 3 nights had belonged to a separate world hidden between stations. Before the police boarded, Blackwood asked Celia for 1 minute alone under Poirot's supervision. She granted it. I did not hear everything. I heard enough. He told her of Eva Dane, not as romance, not as absolution, but as a young woman who sang in field canteens with a laugh too brave for artillery, and who had once said a child should never inherit the cowardice of adults. He admitted he had inherited precisely that cowardice himself. He asked for no title beyond what time might allow. Celia listened, then said, I have been no one's daughter for so long that I cannot become one before breakfast. If you wish to know me, begin after the police are finished. It was not forgiveness. It was a door left unlatched. When officers entered at last, Lady Beatrice stood to meet them as she had no doubt opened hospital wings and committee meetings, upright, composed, and entirely unable now to control the story that would follow her. She did not resist. Pride remained to the end, but pride had lost its utility. Kells surrendered the torn register pages. Villette offered testimony. Blackwood handed over the rosary pouch, and from it the police drew the faded paper naming Eva Dane. Celia watched the scrap of her mother's hand pass into official custody with an expression I can describe only as reverence mingled with mourning for years that could never be returned. Eleanor, once statements were taken, sat at last for the first time in hours. Fatigue hit her like weather. Poirot himself brought her tea. You were brave, he said. She gave a tired half-laugh. I was employed, monsieur. It is not always the same thing. No, said Poirot. Bravery without advertisement is the rarer article. When we stepped onto the platform, the cold struck clean and bright. Reporters had not yet gathered. Porters shouted. Somewhere a brass bell rang out the morning departures. The world, insolently, continued. Later that day Poirot and I were shown the official inventory recovered from Lady Beatrice's effects. In addition to the forged letters, the torn drafts, and the perfumed bottle of Parma violets, there was found the missing pearl itself sewn into the inner hem of her traveling cloak, kept, perhaps unintentionally, as the body keeps a splinter after the wound has closed. So the last material doubt vanished. As for the emotional reckonings, they did not resolve themselves all at once, but they began. Kells wrote a full confession to his bishop and to the surviving trustees of St. Marguerite. Villette offered evidence that exposed Renshaw's old financial manipulations, ensuring that the dead banker would not continue profiting by silence. Blackwood remained in Vienna instead of vanishing into the club and metal life that had protected him for years. Whether he and Celia would ever become father and daughter in more than blood, I could not say. Yet when we saw them 3 days later in the hospital courtyard, they were walking side by side at a distance neither intimate nor estranged. For some lives, that is an enormous beginning. Eleanor received word that the Vienna hospital specialists would admit her brother through a charitable respiratory fund newly endowed, after legal disputes and public scandal, under the plain title The Harrow Restoration. She accepted only when Poirot persuaded her that refusing help can sometimes flatter pride at the expense of love. She wrote to Sam that very evening and included, tucked between practical instructions, a list of books she planned to stock one day in the little seaside shop she had not stopped imagining. Celia kept no Ashcombe name. She chose, publicly and finally, to call herself Celia Dane. It was my mother's, she told Poirot, and the only inheritance no committee can dispute. Poirot seemed pleased by that. When I asked him, as our own train prepared to depart, what detail had convinced him before all the rest, he answered not with the pearl, the perfume, or the left-handed teacup. The look between the benefactress and the railway girl, he said. Evidence tells us what happened. The eyes often tell us what cannot be endured. Lady Beatrice could survive scandal, even prison perhaps. What she could not survive was being accurately seen by someone she had placed beneath notice. From that sprang the attacks on Eleanor, and from those attacks the moral shape of the murderer became plain. He settled his gloves with satisfaction and glanced back once toward the station where a veiled woman had at last become ordinary flesh before the law. Remember it, he added. The grand passions are not always the fatal ones. Vanity, when nourished long enough by worship and silence, can be as deadly as hatred. I remembered. I remember also cabin 13 after the police had gone, the cold cup with 2 lip marks, the broken chain, the berth that had never truly held its supposed occupant, and the faint stale sweetness of violets lingering in the air like a lie too proud to leave. That was the final revelation. The mystery had never been only who killed Evelyn Harrow and Basil Renshaw. It was who had lived so long inside a beautiful false self that murder came to seem not monstrous, but administrative. And once one understood that, every earlier event rearranged itself into dreadful clarity. Final explanation. Evelyn Harrow, a former wartime nurse, knew the truth about an infant exchange at St. Marguerite Mission during the war. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe's baby died during shelling. Amid grief and panic, Colonel Adrian Blackwood proposed substituting the orphaned infant daughter of Eva Dane. Reverend Kells altered records, Dr. Villette obscured medical details, and Basil Renshaw later profited by manipulating legal and financial documents that protected the lie. Evelyn refused payment and eventually tried to expose the truth. Years later, Evelyn contacted Celia Dane, the surviving daughter of Eva Dane and Colonel Blackwood, planning to reveal her origins. Lady Beatrice met Evelyn at the Hotel du Cygne in Paris before the train departed. During a confrontation over confession and proof, Lady Beatrice killed Evelyn with a fire tool, searched the room, and hid the body in a flower crate consigned to her charitable freight on the train. She missed one key item, the rosary pouch naming Eva Dane, which Blackwood later found and concealed. Celia arrived after Evelyn's death, found enough evidence and instructions to impersonate Evelyn aboard the train as the veiled occupant of cabin 13. She used makeup, Evelyn's cloak, and the reservation alias to draw out the people implicated in the old crime. After Celia temporarily left the compartment to remove makeup, Lady Beatrice entered cabin 13 in the same veil and cloak, continuing the illusion that the mysterious woman was still there. Basil Renshaw confronted Lady Beatrice because he recognized the old scandal's return and wanted to extort her again. In their first struggle his watch broke at 1:14 and he tore the clasp from Lady Beatrice's pearl earring. He was later stabbed with the salon letter opener in the service passage, and his body was shifted near the linen area. Lady Beatrice planted a key in Eleanor Bell's alcove to create a convenient suspect. Eleanor Bell heard the lower voice of the second veiled woman, and nearly recognized Lady Beatrice through the disguise. For that reason Lady Beatrice tried twice to kill Eleanor, and later planted misleading notes. Poirot exposed the false solution involving Dr. Villette, baited the real killer with a fake envelope, and used the evidence of the perfume, second teacup, grease paint, soot, broken watch, pearl clasp, mourning thread, planted key, and Lady Beatrice's concealed left-handedness to reconstruct the murders. The emotional truth proved as important as the physical clues. Lady Beatrice's motive was not only self-preservation, but possessive grief, fear of disgrace, resentment of those who threatened the false life she had constructed, and a vanity that could not bear being truly seen, especially by Eleanor, an ordinary young railway attendant whose honest perception pierced the social mask others had long accepted. Celia chose her mother's name, Dane, rather than any claim built on the Ashcombe lie. Eleanor's courage helped save her brother's future through funds redirected in Evelyn Harrow's name. The case ended with every clue resolved, every contradiction explained, and the realization that the most dangerous disguise on the train was not the veil in cabin 13, but the respectable self Lady Beatrice had worn for 20 years. The end.